Welcome to Sifting Through the Rubble, the second semester here at Memorial Lutheran School. Today's topic is why Latin? Why does Memorial Lutheran School teach Latin? Why is Latin important for the curriculum? Why is it important for living? Any question you could ask about Latin, we'll try and cover in the abstract, and then if people have particular questions, or anticipate or have heard particular questions, we can try and tackle those about Latin too. So why Latin? Usually when you say that you teach Latin at a school, people will say, oh, that's a dead language. No one speaks Latin anymore. It's not useful. And none of those are actually true. It's not actually dead. It's just not as living as other more modern languages. There are people who speak Latin and who spend time writing modern words in Latin, which is kind of interesting. That's a little far afield from today's discussion. We're going to tackle a few reasons why Latin, and I've got them typed here from the book, The Latin-Centered Curriculum by Andrew Campbell. There are a few books that one could read or appeal to in the Latin argument. Some are in the chat. I will also put them up here. So you have Tracy Lee Simmons, since that's how it is on the front, Climbing Parnassus. This is a book that is a defense of Latin and Greek in one's education, the reclaiming of the classical languages totally. E. Christian Kopf, professor at University of Colorado in Boulder, his The Devil Knows Latin is a defense of Western Civ and Latin and the classical tradition, not specifically about the languages, but plenty of things about Latin in it. And then this book, Andrew Campbell's The Latin-Centered Curriculum. And then I was just given today an article that is from today. It's by Lee Jones, called A Modest Proposal for Fixing the College Modern Language Requirement. Here is the link here. Relatively easy to find from the James G. Martin Center. And this is an apology for, as in a defense, for teaching Latin in high school and in college, requiring it as the language that people take instead of, say, German or Spanish or French. And if we have time, we'll take a look at that article and see what it gives to the why Latin debate. So generally, the 10 reasons below are standard argumentation for why Latin. Why do we teach the Latin language? They're not in an order of significance necessarily. You can pick and choose which ones you want to present first. If someone were to ask you why are your students taking Latin? Why do your children know Latin? What is the point of doing this? Some are very practical, like the first one. Latin builds English vocabulary. This is not the main reason why you take Latin, but it is certainly an important benefit of taking Latin. More than half of all the words that we have in English come from Latin through Norman French, sometimes through Parisian French, but mostly as a result of William the Conqueror and the Battle of Hastings in 1066. So a lot of English words have Latin roots. This is why there are curricula that exist teaching Latin and Greek roots. Why just teach the roots when you can teach Latin? And then the correlation between words just sort of quadruples and quintuples. And practically speaking, when it comes to standardized testing, the old staple that everyone fears and prepares for, the SAT, knowing Latin puts you far ahead when it comes to vocabulary and syntax and things like that. Also, on a relatively practical level, Latin prepares students for the study of other modern languages. Knowing Latin prepares you one of two ways, and we could add to the inflected languages, we could also add Greek. So, of course, since Latin is the mother tongue of Spanish and French, Italian, Portuguese, and Romanian, knowing Latin assists you in picking up these languages. I'm amazed. I never took Spanish in high school, but I'm amazed at how much Spanish I can understand reading as a result of knowing Latin. French is a mixture there, but I did take some French. Italian is the closest. Portuguese, again, is a mixture. Romanian is a very fascinating language when one sort of stares at it. Knowing Latin, you can see a lot of things that they kept, since Romania was the province of Dacia in the northeastern part of the Roman Empire. Then not just Romance languages are the ones that Latin can prepare you for. There's also inflected languages. Now, in English, we inflect certain words, but not very many. The best example of an inflection in English is the personal pronoun. You can't say, him went to the store. That's the wrong ending for the personal pronoun he. You have to say he went to the store in order to make sense of it. That's an inflection where the ending of the word changes based upon its usage. And Latin does this in spades with regards to adjectives, nouns, participles, verb endings, which we're sort of used to having things agree, but the system is much bigger in Latin. And this prepares you to do other inflected languages like Greek, which different alphabet, sure, but still words, their endings change based upon their usage. They are inflected. German also has inflections, and Greek and German have definite articles. The word the, it's not present in Latin. And so anyone who's taken German, der, die, das, die, knows that you have to know how the endings change. And then in this argument, we can also add Russian. Now, Russian has a different alphabet. It comes from Greek historically, and one can see similarities if one examines them. But Russian has cases for its nouns. The noun endings change based upon their usage. There's one more in Russian than there is in Latin. Latin has 5 cases that are most often found. There's a 6th one, which is not too common, and it's a smaller body of knowledge. Russian has 6. And I guess you could include Finnish in here from an inflection perspective. They have 16 cases. But Latin can give you a leg up either way, whether one goes to the Romance languages, the normal things people take in high school or college, or inflected languages. Third, Latin teaches better grammar than English. And actually, Latin teaches grammar better than English does. English grammar is convoluted because of the history of English. Nothing against English, it can't help it. It's a combination language. English takes in Norse, English takes in Anglo-Saxon or Old English, English takes in Norman French and Latin, and then English absorbs other things later in time. So from the time of Chaucer to the time of Shakespeare, from Middle to Modern English, it's absorbing different words. And then from the beginning of Modern English at the time of Shakespeare, give or take, to now, right over those 400 years, all sorts of things are being absorbed, certainly in vocab. Grammar is not changing a whole lot, but grammar has a lot of irregular portions in English. In Latin, it is stricter and it is more careful. And that's not for lack of using it necessarily, because English, the English used Latin up until the Enlightenment. So it was something that was taught and formed how English grammar was understood. All the masters of English composition had Latin instruction. And actually, the grammar Nazi type persons most of the rules that they try and enforce on English come from Latin. The idea that you have to not split an infinitive, that comes from Latin. Also, prepositions at the end of sentences, that's a Latin idea that has influenced English grammar. Fourth, Latin teaches the mind. It trains the memory. It adds a strong sense of order, and it ingrains attention to detail, since all of the endings give you specific details about what's going on in the sentence. And Latin is very particular in what and how it expresses things. So it is a mind teacher. Translating Latin trains in English composition. It gives good grammar. It instructs in word choice, and one has an emphasis on balance. So when you are translating from Latin into English, you are actually bettering your English, not from a vocabulary perspective, but from a form perspective. And there's another, or was that in this one? Yes, on this fifth reason, the amount of steps one has to take in order to properly translate a basic Latin sentence really teaches a way to think through composition. Number 6, Latin studies increase one's knowledge of the past and of history. Western civilization is bound up in the classical languages. This argument can go both for Greek and Latin. And Greek and Latin have rather widespread influence. Greek texts are being translated into Arabic during the Middle Ages. In fact, they returned to the West through Arabic, sometimes into Latin, before the Greek texts come on their own during the Renaissance. The medieval world was a very interesting world where intellectual studies were pursued. So it's not just Greece and Rome. The rest of the world is being influenced by this and affected. So when we study Latin, we tie ourselves back into the past and history. Many of the examples of our translations come straight out of these things. Well, 7th, cultural literacy is increased by classical studies. When you study Latin and Greek, you are studying that which many, many before us also studied. And the Christian tradition is bound up in Latin. So when we're reading Dante or Shakespeare, when we're listening to Mozart or Bach, Beethoven, any of the masters of the period that usually we study for music, one really can't appreciate it or understand it fully without what Latin and Greek provides. Oftentimes, the layers are very deep. And the more Latin and Greek you know, the more you've been exposed to Western civilization, the more you can appreciate the nuance that is found in our culture that we've inherited as Western people. Reason number 8, Latin literature and history both offer models of virtue and vice. When we examine, this is true of the Greeks also with Plutarch, when we examine the history and literature of the Greeks and the Latins, they wrote these things in order to instruct character, to inform how one lives. And although there are examples of these things in modern languages, the classics that were then later translated into the vernacular or influenced things in the vernacular, that word means the common tongues, they come from Latin and Greek. And so when we study these works, when we read them in their original, we are not only learning language and grammar, but we are learning culture and virtue and seeing moral ideas that we should either spurn or embrace. In line with that is number 9, that the classics provide a lifetime of reading. And this is certainly true. The amount of texts that exist in Greek and Latin first of all, from the ancient period, then from late antiquity, like the 3 to 500s AD, then the Middle Ages, both the early, the middle, sort of the high and the late, then the Renaissance and later works. There are so many things that can be accessed with Greek and with Latin, and all of the different rabbit holes that adds to. So the classics are an area of study that keeps on giving year after year after year, book after book after book. And lastly, Campbell says that classical languages are beautiful. Right? When one studies Latin, one sees order and polish and balance. When one studies Greek, one sees subtlety because of the way that the Greek language works and its necessity to express philosophical truth, since philosophy is bound up in the Greek tradition. So those are 10 arguments. Vocabulary, studying modern foreign languages, better grammar and composition, teaching the mind, increasing one's knowledge of the past, of culture, of virtue and vice, an unending reading list, and an access to actual beauty. Beauty in words, beauty in expression, in the conveyance of ideas. These are all found when one studies Latin, and certainly when one also studies Greek. Now, let's take a look at this article. And see what it can provide for our discussion. The article is a modest proposal for fixing the college modern language requirement. Many are concerned about college, certainly, both for good reason and just because it's in the water. So in many colleges, modern foreign languages are required, Spanish, French, or German. Lee Jones argues that it should be Latin, the original language of university instruction. And this is true. This is why Europe could sort of work in tandem throughout the Middle Ages, because all of the scholars, all those who went to earn their masters, their bachelor's and master's degrees at the European universities, whether it be in Padua or Oxford or Cambridge, or later at Wittenberg in the 1500s, all of them, Leipzig, they were all learning Latin. And they used Latin to converse with each other and to write with each other. They used the vernacular. Luther provides a good example of this in that he will write Latin works for the scholarly community and German works for the common people. So Jones's argument is Latin should be restored in the university. And he anticipates the arguments most give, right? Latin is a dead language. No one speaks it. Why should anyone pay to study a dead language for 1 or 2 years? And he says, yes, I'd actually make it more and outside of college. But the point is not spoken fluency. The point is to increase English language, right? It says right here, English language is a notorious borrower from many languages encountered by the British Empire. Latin has the farthest external influence. 80% of entries in English dictionaries are borrowed mainly from Latin. There also are simple sentences. It's easy to teach. Latin's immediate applications for students in North Carolina and elsewhere jump from vocabulary to grammar. Then one is able to see that the grammar is not abstract, right? It is essential to putting thoughts together. Here's the SAT argument, the GRE argument as an extension of that. One can go into law, medical, or graduate school, but Latin is hardly wasted on the former marketing or management majors we encounter. They reap the benefits of large vocabulary, keen understanding of grammar, insight to the logic that drives Latin sentence construction. So a big, strong push here for Latin at the high school and college level for many of the reasons that we looked at this morning. What's good for students at Memorial is we start Latin in first grade. And so that emphasis that trains the mind and vocabulary and grammar is all occurring at the very formational stages at the beginning of one's education and carrying all the way through, all the way to the end of high school. No one is exempt from Latin. Sometimes Latin just needs to be taught so students know their limitations. But generally speaking, Latin is good for all students because of how it prepares them to meet the challenges ahead in their future and in their daily lives. All right, there's a few minutes left. I know I'm preaching to the choir this morning. Any concerns or reflections on why Latin? A few other references. There's a great fellow on YouTube, goes by the tag Scorpio Martianus. He is a living Latin gentleman. He loves Latin, speaks Latin, presents in Latin, works very hard to cultivate a pronunciation of Latin that is consistent with the 1st century BC, the time of Cicero and Caesar Augustus and Julius Caesar. Scorpio Martianus has there's a Latin channel that you could subscribe to on YouTube, which is very fascinating. He does songs, he does how to scan poetry, all sorts of things. And then he has another one called Polymathy, which is worth subscribing to, which is about learning many things. That's Polymathy. And there's many videos on the necessity of Latin and Greek. He does a whole thing on quirites, that is those who are seeking the knowledge that Latin and Greek provides for a classical education. So Scorpio Martianus and Polymathy are well worth it. Very fascinating and interesting in terms of what they give towards using Latin now and more information and knowledge about Latin, how the language works, and what its influences have been. He'll do videos with Latin speakers from Romania and from Italy and from all sorts of different countries and work on sort of showing how even today a fluent Latin speaker can actually communicate with someone who speaks Italian or Sardinian or Romanian. They're pretty fascinating videos. So I would encourage anyone to watch those if they're interested. He's a lot of fun to listen to. He's a grand proponent of classical languages and their usefulness in daily life. There's also a video on there from last February where he gives an entire speech, presentation in Latin about Latin and Greek pronunciation. There's subtitles at the bottom, but it's great. It's really interesting to hear him speak in Latin and not just recite something, but have a full-blown presentation in a language that many consider dead. All right, so why Latin? Latin is good for the mind. It is good for the soul. It is good for thinking about words and grammar, for learning other languages that assist us in taking care of people all throughout the world. And it is not just some sort of fuddy-duddy experiment. It is engaging with our past and our present and our future. All right, that is the time that we have for today. Next week, we continue with sifting through the rubble and consider another question of why. The question next week is why the great books, something we've touched on and off in Sifting Through the Rubble and in Coffee with the Headmaster. So we'll go and look at why do we read the great books? Why do we focus on literature, all those stuffy books on the shelves that are so hard for people to understand? We'll see you next time on Sifting Through the Rubble. Have a lovely weekend.